Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Step Up to the Mic. This is the place for aspiring and established speakers to take the stage, deliver their talks, and bring them directly to you. Today's featured speaker is making a change after 45 years in journalism, making the change from journalist to novelist. Please welcome John DeDakis.
Hi, everybody. I'm John DeDakis. I'm a manuscript editor, a writing coach, a novelist, and a former editor on CNN's The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer. We're going to talk today about writing as a way to heal. And I want to tell you my story, but you probably have similar stories as well, because grief and loss are universal experiences. And it doesn't mean just the loss of a loved one, it can be the loss of a pet, a job, a relationship, your innocence, your health, any number of things. In fact, I would imagine that it is a universal experience, and the feelings can be very strong. And it's almost as if when you're in the thick of it, you have tunnel vision. It's like no one else understands what you're going through. But, you know, here's the hint. Everybody knows what you're going through because everyone's gone through this. So, what I'm going to talk to you about is my story, but I'm hoping that some of the things that I've experienced and have dealt with might resonate with you as well. Let's go all the way back to when I was 9 years old, a long time ago. And my dad and I were on a train, and we were going between Chicago and La Crosse, Wisconsin, where I'm from. And it was the middle of the night, middle of December. I was in the dome car, and the dome car was elevated above all the other cars. It was near the front of the train, and I was sitting with my nose pressed against the glass, looking at the train tracks stretched out ahead of us as the train was hurtling through northern Illinois in the middle of the night. And out of the corner of my eye, out of nowhere, this car comes from the left and crosses right in front of us. We hit it, and all this debris comes down on the dome. I dive for cover, and the train eventually comes to a stop. And I go downstairs, tell my dad about it, and the conductor. We have to wait while they clean up the accident scene. And while I'm there, my dad goes to the front of the train to see what had happened, and he comes back and reports that we killed everybody in the car. And fortunately, I was spared from having to see all the gore. But a kid my age, about 11 years old, was killed in the accident. And when you're young and impressionable at that age, you come face to face with your mortality, which is a pretty young age for that to happen. So fast forward, um, it's about 40 years later. And by this time, I'm a journalist and I'm working at CNN. I'm a writer, but they've just made me an editor. And I'd already been a White House correspondent, I'd been a reporter. And so editing was tedious. It paid well, but I needed a creative outlet. And so I was beginning to teach myself how to write fiction. Now, I know some of you who understand journalism were probably saying, yeah, you've been writing fiction the whole time. We won't go there. I take your point. I don't agree. But here's the thing. I was doing a writing exercise as a way to get practice in writing fiction. And one of the writing exercises was to write about a personal experience. And so I started to do just the facts about this car train collision that I witnessed. Here's the thing I discovered. It's what I call the spooky power of the subconscious. Because when you write and you ask yourself what if questions, that stirs up your subconscious and things are starting to bubble to the surface, all those experiences that you've had. So I'm writing about this. And as I'm writing, I remember a radio news report that I'd heard a week after this accident about a train collision in which an infant survived. And I began to play what if? What if that kid grew up and wanted to know more about her parents? So as I'm writing this just the fact story, another idea for a fictional story takes place, and I'm beginning to formulate what became Fast Track, my first novel. I write as a woman. That's a whole nother talk. There's probably a 12-step program to explain all that, which is sort of beside the point. But I created a character who's in her 20s. She's all grown up. Her parents have been killed in a car accident, and she's trying to figure out more about her past. So, another personal experience that happens at the time, maybe about 15 years after, 15 years before I start writing this novel, is my sister. My oldest sister took her life, and I was on the scene that day. It was carbon monoxide poisoning, and it's a terrible experience. And so you fast forward, and I'm writing this novel, and one of the things I teach my writing students is write what you know. And in our society, we tend to anesthetize the pain. We want to numb ourselves from feeling these things. But one of the people I was talking with at the time my sister died gave me some really good advice. I didn't really understand it at the time, but he said, move toward the pain. So I did. And so when I was writing this novel, I found the experience cathartic. So the very first chapter of Fast Track deals with my sister's suicide. The book is not about her, but I'm drawing from that emotional place that I experienced. And so the character I created, Lark Chadwick, is named after Chadwick, Illinois, where the car train collision happened that I witnessed. And one of the things that I discovered over the years is that the character that I'm writing, and I didn't discover this until probably the fourth novel came out, that I'm writing a character that I wish my sister had allowed herself to become, because my sister was brilliant. She could have been a surgeon. She could have been a concert pianist. But her husband at the time said, what would it look like, a football coach married to a surgeon? And one by one, my sister gave up her dreams to the point where she, 20 years later, went into the garage, closed the door, turned on the car, and ended it. And so my protagonist, Lark Chadwick, does not let a guy define who she is. And yet she still falls for the bad boys. She's still a flawed character, but I think she's got a little more spine, a little more self awareness than my sister had. Fast forward. Now I've been at CNN for almost 25 years. I'm living in DC. I'm one of Wolf Blitzer's editors on the Situation Room. And while I'm in this job, my youngest son, Stephen, goes missing. And that's out of character for him. He's 22 years old, good kid, and he went off the grid. Now, I had a hunch of what was going on because a month before this happened, he had revealed to me that he was using heroin. And I look back on that conversation, and we had a heart to heart. And I look back on that conversation, and I'm relieved that I didn't go off on him. I didn't kick him out of the house. We had a heart to heart, and we talked about how he might be able to go forward. And he had tried to reach out to schedule a conversation with a psychologist. The guy's schedule was full, and then Stephen went missing. And so I kind of knew that this was not going to end well, and it didn't. He was found dead in my car of an accidental heroin overdose, just a block and a half away from where we lived in DC. Well, I mean, I don't have to tell you that's devastating. And so I went through grief counseling this time. I mean, I knew moving toward the pain is a wise thing to do, but this kind of loss, that's pretty staggering. And so I went through grief counseling. And one of the things I learned, and I highly recommend counseling if you've never gone through it, it's a great way to sort out your feelings, and it's a safe place. And there was a time, probably 5 months into this 2.5 year relationship, where I said to my grief counselor, there's something I really need to tell you. And the only two people I've told this to are dead. And she flinched. And I said, "That's not why they're dead." And she relaxed. And I was able to tell her what had been nagging me for decades. And once I got it off my chest, and it's, what's a big deal for me might not be a big deal for you, and vice versa. The point is that it was a safe place where I could talk about stuff that I couldn't talk to anyone else about. And once I did that, it was a major burden lifted. It was a major relief. So I've learned a lot of things in grief and through counseling. And one of the experiences that I had during this time, my wife and I by this time had been married about, I don't know, 30 years or so, 37 years maybe. And one of the things that happened was very interesting. We were in the car together, and a CD was on, Carole King's Tapestry album. And a song came on called, I think, Home Again. And it starts out, "Sometimes I wonder if I'm ever going to make it home again." Now, I'm not a great singer, but that creates a lot of grief in anybody who's listening. But here's the point. When Cindy heard the song, she hit the button that advances it to the next track. And I asked her, "So why did you do that?" And she said, "Every time I hear it, it makes me cry." As it turns out, every time I heard that song, I would hit the repeat button because it made me cry. Same song, same emotional reaction, different way of dealing with it. And that was probably one of the strongest lessons I learned from the grief process. And that is, people grieve in their own way. I think it's one reason why a lot of marriages don't survive the death of a child, because it's real easy to compare your grief to your spouse's and to, want to check in or want to fix it. And we just knew instinctively that we were going to have to grieve separately and have our own support systems. So by this time, I was a published novelist. I wrote book four, Bull in the Chamber, which deals with my son's death. And I used it as collateral to show collateral damage surrounding something traumatic like this. And I built it into my character, Lark Chadwick's life. And now it's been 20 years since I started, since my first novel was published. And I'm looking back and I realized, holy cow. I mean, grief has been the way I've been dealing with my grief through writing. And all of my novels have grief as a subtext. Journalism is also a subplot in many of these books. You write what you know. And so I've been teaching people how to use grief and loss and pain as a way to mine that pain, to put it into your stories, because, stories about happy people living happily ever after, that's not particularly interesting as a reader. I mean, look at your reading habits yourself. Chances are you like to, live vicariously through the lives of your protagonist and your characters. And so that's what I try to teach my students to do. One last thing I want to talk about, and that is fear, because fear is also part of the writing process, and it's also part of the grief process, the living process, because I can't think of anything more frightening than facing the possibility of life without your loved one, your job, your pet, or whatever the grief experience is. Fear is part of the process. And I've learned a few things about fear. I call it the fear continuum. There's recklessness, that's the lack of fear. There's caution, that's counting the cost. There's cowardice, that's knowing what you should do and freezing. And then there's courage, that's going forward anyway in spite of your fears. I can give you a quick story of recklessness. My son James is a drummer, and he was the jazz drummer in his high school, or not high school, in college. He was a drummer in a band called Arizona that traveled the country. And James was visiting me in DC, and we went to an open mic jam session at a jazz club in DC. And I said to James, "James, you going to go up there and play?" And he goes, "No." I should have listened. James has chops, but he's also got some wisdom and knew that this would not be a good situation for him. I should have listened. I go swaggering up there, fearless. I take the sticks from the house drummer and they call something that's 4/4 medium swing. I can do that. I mean, Ringo Starr taught me how to play drums. He doesn't know it, but that's how I learned when the Beatles came out, and I just taught myself how to do it. But this was a different situation. So I got through the first song fine. Then a couple of horn players get up. I find out later that they just played a gig at the Kennedy Center. So I'm in over my head, but I don't know it. So you know you're in trouble when during the song, the house drummer goes, I'll take over. And so here I am trading sticks with him. And I learned an important lesson about fear. And that is that it's okay to fail because failure is probably one of the most significant fears that we have in life and in writing. We want to be perfect. We don't want to be judged. But failure, man, that's like death. But you know what? It really isn't death. There is death. And so what I did is I joined a writing or a jazz workshop. And a guy named Paul Piper in Fairfax, Virginia, brings people together for 2 hours a week to play jazz. It's like improv, it's like improv comedy. You fail. You know, you're improvising as you go. And if you get comfortable with failure, that actually gives you confidence because the what I define as courage is fear in action. It's sort of like the guys who stormed the beaches of Normandy, during World War II. Were they afraid? They were terrified, but they went forward anyway. Fear is not it's not courage is not waiting for the courage to come. It's going forward anyway. It's harnessing the fear and going forward. And so here's the thing. We've been talking about fearful or painful experiences. I've been telling you about my writing and how I've been able to appropriate the painful experiences I've had into my writing. And I've also introduced you to the concept of facing fear. So here's what I want to leave you with are these questions. I want you to ask yourself, what is it that you're afraid of, whether it's about your writing or just about living? What is it that makes you afraid? But why are you afraid? What is it about failure that's so fearful? No one's shooting at you. So, what are you afraid of? Why are you afraid? But here's what I want to leave you with, and that's the question: what are you going to do with those fears? Thanks.
John DeDakis, everybody, absolutely powerful. John, thank you so much for coming on
Thank you.
and sharing all of that. Before we get into the Q&A, I have to tell you, I'm sorry for your losses.
Thank you.
And it's amazing the way you found a way to deal with them, and even more
Thank you.
amazing that you want to share that with everybody else. Let me start there, if it's okay.
Sure.
What makes you want to take these personal experiences that caused you so much grief and share how you've dealt with it with the world?
I wouldn't say I want to do this, but I can't not do it. I think, and maybe it's the journalist in me used to telling stories. I mean, I would meet people on the worst day of their life. And, news is not, the plane landed safely today. That's not news.
Right.
And so a lot of journalism is dealing with pain and loss. And so I think that became something I was, for lack of a better word, comfortable with. And then when I went through it and realized that I could go through it, I think there's a teaching gene. My mom was a third grade teacher. My dad was a lawyer. So, there's something in me that, has that desire to share what I've learned and help people to make sense of things because, that we know the 5 stages of grief, but there's a sixth one now called finding meaning. And I've found meaning. And so I think that there's just a strong desire to try to share what I've learned.
Wow. After 45 years in journalism, you would think that you had already kind of, gone through a process of some kind, and I'm sure that you have. But in your private writing with your 6 books and whatnot, there's been a whole different journey, it seems like, that you've sort of undergone. At what point did you realize that how much grief and how you manage it, how you handle it, was so much at the center of what you were writing about?
I don't, th I mean, I think that on one level I just knew because that's what I was writing, but it's only been, I think, Rory, in the last few months or maybe a year at the most, where I've actually looked back and said, that's the common thread here is grief. And I certainly didn't set out to do that. It was inadvertent. It's almost serendipitous to look back and realize, that that's what's been going on all this time. So I'm a, the bottom line is I'm a slow learner.
I should have known I was going to get an answer like
Yeah.
that. So, the as we talk about the progression, that you've gone through here, um, you start with writing these books, and you've got some political, mystery type, thrillers and things like that. You branch into, the bullet in the chamber, which obviously is, so much more personal. And now you and I were talking, and you want to, it sounds like maybe help prevent some of these things by working with corporations, wellness programs. Give me an idea of where your journey is now and where you want to take it.
Well, let's see. I'm still writing. I journal every day, so that's probably the most fundamental thing. Book seven is a work in progress. I've got procrastination nailed, so that's where that is. I've got a memoir that's being considered at a publishing house right now that actually identifies the pivotal moments in my life that have brought me to where I am. So, pivotal experiences in terms of career writing and so on. Um, but what I'm actually trying to do now is in addition to speaking to the writing community, people who are either published writers or who are wannabe writers, and helping them, I'm branching out and talking to corporations, wellness programs, veterans groups, bereavement organizations, to help them see how writing can be a way to heal. And so it's not like I'm necessarily preventing anything, but I'm helping people to process it in a way that can be constructive and therapeutic and cathartic.
Nice. I appreciate you, describing the difference there. And I get it. I totally get it. I love what you're doing. Wow. After all of this time, doing, being a participant in journalism, in the journalism world, and
Right.
then, of course, with all the time in being a novelist, what makes you want to get out of that and, make such a detour in the direction that you're going?
Well, I don't know. Want is again not is not necessary. I mean, I'm a journalist at heart. I mean, I was a political science minor, so it's still in my blood. But come on, I was 65 years old, and there comes a time when it's time to move on because they say it's time to move on. They didn't really say that, but they kind of made it. They were doing the paper trail. They were doing all the kind of stuff that was making it not fun anymore.
I
But
gotcha.
uh, fortunately, I had another direction that I could go. And so it really wasn't fun anymore. And it became not fun right after Sandy Hook when, this kid goes in and slaughters 20 elementary school kids with a military grade weapon. I mean, that was just horrendous. And I was being paid by CNN to watch parents cry over their grieving kids or their dead kids. And that, been there, done that. It wasn't fun anymore.
Sure.
And so I left journal work day-to-day journalism in 2011, but or no, actually 2013. And then Trump runs for president in 2017. And I started writing fake because he was starting to talk about journalists being enemies of the American people. And it's just not true. And so I wanted to craft a story in which Lark is the victim of fake news. We, the reader, know that what's happening and what's national news about her is not true. But I wanted to show that lies have consequences. And we're now at a point where, I think part of the grief process is grieving the loss of civil discourse. And we can't agree with people on the facts anymore. And I think that that creates a grief experience too. I think we've lost friends, we've lost loved ones. and I'm hoping to be able to bridge that gap as well. I'm long past being able to feel as if I'm going to be able to lob a rhetorical artillery shell into the enemy camp and believe that, once it goes off, it's going to change somebody's mind. It's not. It's just going to piss people off and make and harden positions. So I'm now at a point where I'm trying to help people connect on a human level to try to find common human ground, because I think we're at a point right now, at least for the time being, where we're not going to be able to find common political ground. We just can't agree on the facts.
Sure. I appreciate what you're trying to do there. I really do. And power to you, because that's not going to be an easy thing to go out and accomplish and address. That's for sure. Not
No,
in today's world.
not today.
So, yeah, I wish you luck with that. I'm sure you're going to make some headway somewhere. So,
May it be so.
you got it. Oh, you got it. I love what you're doing. I love what you're about here, John. You are teaching young writers, wannabe writers, to be actual professional writers. And I'm
Yes.
curious, when it comes to connecting with your emotion, with grief, with processing things through your writing, is that something that comes naturally to people, or is that something that is kind of hard to get going?
I think it's hard for people. I think there's an instinct to do it, but and there may be gender issues here as well. I mean, in my experience, women, I think, are more willing to share their emotions and they're more articulate about them when they share them. I think men, at least, I don't want to make a generalized statement because I certainly know guys who are, fine with being able to cry. But I think in general, guys tend to bottle it up, and it doesn't really make the pain go away. It's just more corrosive. And if you think about it, I can only think of maybe one or two exceptions where some of these mass shooters are not guys. I think just about every mass shooting is done by a guy. And my hunch is, and I have no data to back this up, but my hunch is that what ends up happening is we've got unprocessed grief. And what happens is the tears become bullets.
Hmm. Wow, that's powerful. Um, as we kind of bring this to a close here, I love what you did. I loved your talk. It was
Thank
absolutely
you.
fantastic, and you did it beautifully. I can't
Thank you.
wait to see you on a stage doing that
Thank
someplace.
you.
So I'll be looking forward to seeing that.
Thank you.
I have to digress a little bit, though, just for
Sure.
my own curiosity. I got to ask you this.
Yeah.
You wrote a book through the voice of being a woman.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
cannot even, I mean, I've written a couple of books. They're nowhere near what you've put out there. But oh my goodness, John, I cannot even imagine trying to do that. What was that like?
Well, I appreciate the question, and it certainly comes up a lot. And it was nothing calculated on my part. When I first started writing fiction, someone suggested that I should write in a way that stretches who I am. Never been a woman, at least not in this life. So,
There you go.
I gave it a try. And the interesting thing that I discovered is that emotions are not gender specific. We all have the exact same emotions. And so writing as a woman was accessible. And then I was doing this at a time when I was working at CNN, surrounded by young women in their early to mid 20s who would let me ask them questions about what it's like to be a woman. And they would tell me their stories about their boyfriends, their careers, their families, their jobs. And I learned a lot. Just to give you one example, there was an anchor I worked with, beautiful. And I remember asking her, what's it like for guys to come on to you all the time? And she said, I can tell in the first 20 seconds if I'm safe. I never have to worry about being safe in a conversation. And I learned a really important lesson. What it means to be a woman is to play defense. And that was just one little tidbit. And so a lot of these women became beta readers for me. They would read early drafts and tell me what I was getting wrong and what I was getting right.
My goodness. I mean, just that alone was so incredibly just okay. That is a whole other episode. You were exactly right when you said that. That is another
We just
entire
need to
interview, brother.
listen. We need to listen to the women in our lives. They've got
Yeah,
so many stories to tell, but we
love it.
tend to mansplain and we speak over them. I've got there's some women friends who told me they were in meetings. And they would say, "This is what I think we should do." Dead silence. Two people later, a guy says the exact same thing, and everybody goes, "That's a great idea." This
I
happens
hear you.
over and over again.
I hear you. All right. Well, it sounds like you have an awful lot to work on out there and to sort of fights to fight out there.
Yes.
So, all right, brother. I appreciate you. I appreciate you coming on here and loved your talk. And, I hope that this helps you to share this talk and take you to new places where you get to, spread these thoughts and all your skills to even more hearts and minds, brother. I really do.
Great. Thank you, Rory. This has been great. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Hey, but before I close out, though, how can everybody reach you? I can't forget that part.
Oh, well, thank you. The best way to do it is through my website, and it's a tricky Greek name, so I'll spell it. It's johndedakis.com, John, D as in dog E, D as in dog A, Kis as in Sam, johndedakis.com. It's got links to my books, to the talks that I give on using writing as a way to heal. Um, yeah, all kinds of stuff.
Wonderful. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to make sure we got that in there.
Thank
All
you.
right. John DeDakis, everybody. 45 years in journalism, moving from journalist to novelist and beyond. And it sounds like we're looking for great things to come from this gentleman. I cannot wait to be able to say I had him on my show way back when. All right. Folks, this has been another spectacular episode of Step Up to the Mic. If you're an aspiring or current speaker and you want to bring your talk to the masses, message us today. Never stop talking and let us help you to step up to the mic.